So, welcome to Tanya Today, Rabbi Fine, coming to you from my son's home and sharing with you. Today is Tanya with great honor and pleasure. We are in the 29th letter. This letter we spoke about yesterday, reincarnation, and went into detail about reincarnation. And the important point that we want to bring home over here is there's an infinite light of God that our soul cannot absorb. And from there's a contraction on the infinite light of God that is also something that we call a glimmer. It's like hair comparable to the brain, right? The life force in hair is tenuous, as you can cut hair, God forbid the brain not. And that contraction is powerful, but yet even that is something too great for the soul to experience today. But what comes from that ray of light is that glimmer is a garment. Like garments protect the person, so likewise these garments fit the individual. They fit every limb of the body for 613 limbs of the body, figuratively speaking, or the soul rather. 613 commandments that fit the individual. Meaning, what does it mean it fits? It means we absorb it. It's integrated. We have a connection to it. And that is called a garment. And that's something that we create, we garb ourselves. Now, the Alter Rebbe goes further with this idea. And he says, that light that we create, how do we create that light? It's through the mitzvah that we do. Not the garb, we'll get to the garb in a moment, but the light itself that we create through doing a mitzvah, even though, as we said, it is contracted, it's like a hair comparable to the brain. That light is hidden away for the time to come in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. By the way, parenthetically, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that here, but then we can understand a concept that there's light before there's a sun in creation. God created in the first day, Vayhi Or, let there be light. And he says he hid that light away because it hid that light away. That's a light that we don't have now. And in fact, on the first day of creation, what does it mean that God created light when there was no sun until the fourth day? That's a light we're talking about over here. It's hidden for the time to come, meaning Gan Eden. And that will be a pleasantness of God, the pleasurable thirst, that ray that we were talking about. It's also called, which is interesting from this week's Torah portion, that when Avraham purchased the Maras HaMachpelah for 400 Arba Meos shekel kesef, 400 400 shkolim of silver kesef. So the word kesef has a similarity to the word nichsafti, a longing. So it's 400 worlds of longing that we get a light of in Gan Eden after our time here on earth. Now that light has many rungs to it. But it is pleasurable light. And hence what will happen? What will happen in Gan Eden? We will have the pleasure of the divine light of God. Divine light we will have pleasure. Now, that divine light of pleasure that we will experience in Gan Eden, it produces an external something comes from pleasure. So Al-Darab explains, and the metaphor we need to understand from the human condition. What's the human condition? For the most part, it's not always this way, but it's usually this way. Pleasure produces a desire for something, that which is pleasurable, that which is, you want those things in life, that you don't have pain, firstly, and you have pleasure in it. So pleasure produces a will. That will then is the cause for you going after what it is that you desire. Right? That's what the will does. So pleasure is the internal force that creates an external force in the person of a desire for something, a will for something. That's very important. That's the way it is in the human condition. So again, what's important over here to appreciate what causes what, and therefore what's internal is pleasure, what's external is desire, is will. That's the way it is in the soul of the person. So now, let's understand that metaphor, how it applies to the Ein Sof, to God. The supernal will is the external, hindmost aspect of the supernal delight of God, the pleasantness of God. So when we speak that each mitzvah that we do creates a garment, that garment is shielding the soul, the 613 components of the soul that each garment shields, protects. That garment is a result of divine will. It's a result of the divine will of God. But that's external when we speak about, in reference to God, there's divine pleasure of God that produces a divine will. That divine will is the source of the garment that we garb ourselves, 613 different kinds of pieces of clothing that we garb the soul with 613 different kinds of commandments. Now, we have to appreciate there is a very big distinction between our will and the divine will, and also divine pleasure. But what's the distinction? The clear distinction is that our will can be a compounded will, and it's not necessarily truly one with me. You know, my granddaughter wants a lollipop. Why she want a lollipop? Well, it gives her pleasure. But how strong is that pleasure that it's giving the will? Not that strong, because you know what? She put aside the lollipop afterwards. A couple of licks, that was enough. Right? So the desire for it wasn't so strong, because the pleasure of it, I guess, at the moment wasn't so strong. However, right, and why is that? Because the desire for the lollipop, which was produced by a pleasure in it, wasn't one with her. It wasn't so powerful. It wasn't so great. That's the way it is by us. In heaven, God's pleasure, delight, and His will are united and one with the Ein Sof, with God. And in that way, there's no comparison. We use the same terminology, but it's really very, very different. Then if it's one with God, then why do we use the term external and internal? We need to use those terms because that's by us that way. We can't really understand the divine on its terms. We have to understand in our terms. So in our terms, you have a pleasure in something. You have a pleasure in a lollipop, in a something sweet, right? That gives you a desire for it. So for my granddaughter, it's a lollipop. For another, it might be a beautiful melody that gives a pleasure, a delight to the soul, that therefore gives you a desire for the niggin. Or it might be a divine, or it might be some wisdom. You see, when you get something, it gives you a pleasure. Why? Because that pleasure is enclosed in that wisdom, that when you get that wisdom, when you chap it, when you apprehend it, you comprehend it, it gives a pleasure. And therefore, when you really delight in that, then what's going to happen? It's going to create a will that's where you want to find your delight in life, as opposed to the lollipop. Now, can you have delight in a lollipop? For sure. But obviously in a wisdom, and especially if it's a divine wisdom, especially a wisdom that enhances, empowers us, is something more delightful. Yet, and the proof is in the pudding, not necessarily every day that we come and learn Tanya. Why? It's because it's not truly, that delight is not truly one with us. That desire is not truly one with us. Because if it was truly one with us, then it would be not something that just like I am, so my learning of Tanya would be. But it's not. And therefore, that gives us room for the choice to choose it. Because it's not a true unity and oneness with me. The divine it is. Now, so let's take this apart. Let's make sure we got this. There's the infinite of God. There's a divine pleasure of God. There's a divine will of God. And that divine will creates a specific garment. That garment is a specific mitzvah. That specific mitzvah is something that is made to measure, to fit my soul. We have 613 expressions, garments of the divine will. Each garment is something that now fits me. Now, why do I need a garment? What's the point over here of the concept of a garment? So we explained earlier, what does a garment do? It protects me. It shields, right? Hey, I'm from Montreal. Well, I'm not from Montreal, but I live in Montreal. Right? Well, let's say I'm from Montreal. That's what you would say today, right? So, winter is coming. And you need an outer garment. But the truth is, we have outer garments, we have inner garments, a t-shirt, right? A shirt. So now, on one level, a garment is merely to, as they say, the clothes make the man, right? It enhances the individual. On a deeper level, or not a deeper level, maybe that's on a deeper level. On a simple level, it is a protective shield. So why do I need that protective shield? For my soul. Because when my soul leaves this world, what I have that garment that then allows me to absorb the source of that, the source of the will of God. And what's the source of the will of God? Pleasure of God. That pleasure of God, as we mentioned at the beginning of the class, is something that the soul will be able to absorb, to experience the pleasure of God in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. But it's only by way of the protective garment that we create by doing the mitzvah now. Now, just to give proper context to all of this, we're talking about that which you are going to be able to experience, as opposed to what you actually accomplish. So, just to give a better context for this, one might think based on this, so then the whole point of doing a mitzvah is only that I can get the pleasure of the divine in the Garden of Eden after I leave this world, and therefore, let me work towards that. And the whole purpose of this world is only to have what we get in the afterworld. That would be a mistake. Yes, there is something in the afterworld in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And afterworld we're talking about here, not times of Mashiach. We're not talking about the times of Mashiach, right? We're talking about Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, where it's souls without the body. So, and remember when we said the pleasure is a contraction of the infinite light of God that is only a glimmer that you get. However, please recognize that today, when you do a mitzvah, yes, you create a garment for the soul, but you're also attaching yourself to the essence of God himself, the Ein Sof. We don't experience it today. At the same time we create that garment, we don't experience it today. But when Mashiach comes, we will experience the mitzvah that we're doing now, the attachment to the very core and essence of God himself. We do that now in the act of the mitzvah, beyond the garment for the soul. that we create. It's a bond to God himself, which we will experience, which is even greater than divine pleasure. It's even greater than divine pleasure. The Ein Sof of God that will be revealed in times of Mashiach. So just to give proper context, I don't want you to think for a moment, that all we're doing is that all we're doing is a mitzvah now, so we can create a garment for the soul, so then therefore I can have the delight of God, that I can absorb and experience the delight of God, that ray, that glimmer of divine pleasure in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And therefore that's all we're working towards. No. Yes, that is an aspect, and that's what we're speaking about over here. An aspect of the mitzvah, but not the completion or the full picture. Just want to make sure that was clear. Again, we're not really talking about that over here, because that's not the focal point of this particular letter. With that, we can understand why, again, we have reincarnation. Reincarnation means the soul did not have its completion. It has its attachment with the essence of God here, but it doesn't have its completion if there's parts, components of the soul, 613 components, that did not fulfill what it needs to fulfill. Now, that doesn't mean in one lifetime. It can be that we come back with a soul that 611 components of the soul have been garbed with the mitzvah, through the mitzvah rather, have been garbed. But there's two mitzvahs, maybe even just one, that the soul has not been garbed with, and therefore that's why it returns, in order that that soul can become complete. And it's something we spoke at length yesterday, which we won't speak further now. Unless someone brings up a question, of course. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts. I can't take it on Facebook. I'm very sorry. I don't know what happened today. Why on Facebook I don't have the feed at all. But more than welcome. To take it on Clubhouse, on Instagram. It may be a little, I'll try, might be a little difficult. I'll try to do it, because it's hard to see things. Okay. But do we have anybody here?
Did you want me to read some of the questions that
I okay. Thank you, Vilma. Oh, you know what? Perfect. You know what? I didn't think of that. Thank you for thinking of that. Yeah, beautiful. Please do.
Okay. The first question that I saw was from John Riggs.
Yes.
It was a statement that the garment for the soul derives from the Korayim and Shitzonim and are fused in absolute unity for God and His will are one. In order for the soul to absorb that level of illumination, it must be equipped with the garment of 613.
Okay.
That statement, what brought to mind was something that I read about the body and the soul being garbed, I think it was Gufdas and Gufdah. So what you described as the angel ethereal body or garment is what I think of as the Gufdah.
Okay, I'm not clear on that. Anything else, Vilma? Can you also do me a favor? Is there any other question?
There's more. Yeah,
take a look. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Eliana, just give a moment.
Okay, soul is
Can you
incarnated.
just do me a favor? Just speak up a bit because I want to make sure that it's going to be heard also on the other platforms. Go ahead.
So Diddy says, when a soul is in Gan Eden and our garments are cleansed, does that soul have to wait until Mashiach add to their garments, since our souls can't do mitzvah in Gan Eden?
Well, that's the concept of reincarnation. Since our soul can't do a mitzvah in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, right? It's only a soul without a body. You need a body to fulfill a mitzvah. So the soul needs to return. But if the soul is complete, so then it doesn't need to return, and it's waiting Gan Eden for Mashiach to come. Absolutely.
Okay, another question from Asha Reese. Can you describe more fully the characteristics of and the differences between Gan Eden and the time of Mashiach?
Okay, excellent question. Thank you, Asher. The difference between the Garden of Eden and the times of Mashiach. So, which is a very important understanding. So, in Gan Eden is after we finish our times in this world. What happens when we pass away is the soul separates from the body. The soul goes to Gan Eden ultimately. I mean, it goes through a process of Gehenna first, a cleansing process, but then it comes to Gan Eden. In Gan Eden is what we just spoke about, that we experience divine pleasure, but it's a glimmer. Remember, that was like the hair. Divine pleasure is like a reduction of the Ein Sof, of the limitlessness of God. And even though it's divine pleasure and it's one with the Ein Sof, but yet it is in fact merely a glimmer. So even that glimmer is too powerful for us to experience today. Our soul will be able to experience it because the garment that we create today, through the mitzvah that we do, that will be able to have that glimmer. Now that glimmer will be as a result of fulfillment of the mitzvah that we do today in thought, speech, and action, that garbs the soul, will then allow us to absorb that light. It's like, the sun is so powerful, you need something, a protective shield to be able to absorb that sun that's not going to nullify you away. Today we wouldn't be able to have that experience. It'd be too much for a soul and a body. So that's only in Gan Eden. Yet it's a glimmer. It's only a glimmer. In the times of Mashiach, we will, and this is the paradox. You would think that the loftiest time, the greatest time, is going to be a soulful time only of soul, and that's why most faiths and religions, that for them it's after this world. This world is only a means to the next world, and therefore in the next world you're going to have the ultimate. In Judaism, it's not. The ultimate is a soul in a body in this world. Ultimately, God is not limited in any fashion, and the ultimate expression of the divine, the essence of God, is in the paradox of a soul and a body. So the soul and the body right now, because of the animal soul that we have, and because we haven't refined ourselves in the world sufficiently, is not capable of experiencing the core essence of God, the Ein Sof, and which is beyond divine pleasure. It's it's like having pleasure in somebody is not as great as having pleasure in them, period. Not having the pleasure of them, and then there is having them. So having the pleasure of somebody, maybe as you said, my granddaughter, the pleasure is in a lollipop. For maybe some of us, the pleasure is in beautiful melody, or greater than that is a wisdom that you have pleasure in. Greater than that is in a divine teachings of Torah, having pleasure in. but it's all the pleasure of. Then there is having it, not the pleasure of it. Which, by the way, in human relations, I want to point out, thank you, Asher, for this question. I just want to point out in human relations, unfortunately, we limit ourselves to having the pleasure of other people, right? You give me such pleasure in my life. Therefore, I love you. So what do I love? You or the pleasure that I derive from you? No, the pleasure I derive from you. That pleasure that we derive from another person is only a glimmer compared to them. To be connected to them. Why? For what? For nothing. Because it's them. Period. I love you not for, the pleasure you give me in life. I love you for you. Period. That's Mashiach.
Awesome.
So the connection is to God, not for the pleasure that he gives us. That's a glimmer. That's a soul will have, even though that's awesome. But it's not of God himself. Mashiach will be of the essence of and the core of God himself, beyond pleasure. And so again, what that means for us today in the human condition is to rise above it and not to enjoy another person for the pleasure you have from them. Again, whatever that pleasure might be, it might be. And we will begin that way. And that's the way it begins, actually. Having the pleasure of God in Gan Eden. But then we rise beyond that. So now the teachings of Tanya actually are a taste of what's going to be times of Mashiach. And therefore what we're learning through this is that we can have a relationship to God. And because we can have this kind of relationship with God, we can have it with others also. Our marriages can be this way. Our relationship to our children can be this way. Our relationship to others can be this way, that I am not merely connected to you because of the pleasure you give to me in my life. But I'm connected to you because it's you that I love, not the pleasure of you, not the things you do that make me feel good about me. Then really what I'm doing is just loving myself through you. It's not really a self-love, a selfish love ultimately. And it's a love that will not last. But if we become, we're not going to get there initially, right? But what we need to rise to is to be able to appreciate the person for who they are, love them for who they are, and not the pleasure that they give you in your life. Whatever, pleasure you seek, whether it's lollipop style, whether it's, melody style pleasure, or wisdom style. So, so if you have a child that, isn't into Torah wisdom, right? Or you have a child that's just not into even intelligence, but maybe a melody. So you can sing Hasidic melody together. You can relate on that level. Or maybe they're not even that, and it's really very materialistic. So it's not about loving the materialistic nature of them. That's not what we're saying. It's about accepting it for sure. And accepting it and loving them, period. Connecting to them, period. Not because you have some derive the pleasure that you seek in your life, but that's their pleasure, so you can connect to them on their level. And And by the way, we're not saying not to have the pleasure. It's not about not having pleasure from the other person, but it's not about having the pleasure that you merely seek, that you want in your life, that you can have pleasure of them for where they're at and for who they are. That would be amazing and powerful. All right.
We have several more questions on Facebook if you'd like.
Sure, but you know what, Eliana, I don't know what happened, but you know what, give another couple, and then you'll share with us. Okay, Michelle, we'll wait for another couple of questions, so that way you won't lose the feed. Go ahead, Vilma.
Okay. How does change from doing it in this world out of choice compared to doing it in Western times? Did we answer that one?
Repeat that again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
How does a mitzvah change from doing it in this world out of choice compared to doing it in the times of Mashiach?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Whoa. So today our choice is between, good and evil, right and wrong. There's choice. Times of Mashiach, evil is eradicated. So then what choice is there? Well, in good, there's levels. In light, there's levels. So in purity, there are levels. So we can still grow. So today we grow from the mistakes that we make. In Mashiach's time, we will grow not from the mistakes, but from the greater potential that we could develop to become. So here is from darkness to light. There it'll be from light to greater light. Is the basic idea. Excellent. Another question?
Yes. A question from Mike. Where in Tanakh is an example of Gilgul?
Excellent question. I'm not certain. I have to do a little more research on that, Mike. It may be it's only alluded to. It is not clearly stated, the concept of reincarnation, Gilgul. So clearly not. It's clearly not indicated in the written Torah. In other words, clearly stated as a statement, the concept of Gilgul, reincarnation, but it is alluded to. But I'm sorry, I don't know that off the tip of my tongue or in my brain right now. I need to look that up. But excellent question. I'll try to do that. Okay. Any other question, Vilma?
Yes, just a moment.
Is it being heard on Facebook? You can hear it on Facebook and Instagram, the questions?
I believe they can hear them on Facebook.
Okay,
I'm not
good.
sure about Instagram.
No, okay, I'm sure it's the same. Go ahead.
Greg asked, did Moses catch a glimmer of God when he asked to see him?
Excellent question. We actually learned this, by the way, in letter, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or something like that. We learned it. I don't remember which letter. It'll come to me. So he apprehended in prophetic vision not the divine wisdom, but divine attributes of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, of endurance, acknowledgement, and foundation, as we translate it. um, of the divine order of things. But as God said, my face you will not see. So that is the idea of, but my backside you will. What is that? It's all a metaphor. Here we call the metaphor inner, external. Divine pleasure creates which is the inner impetus to create a will, as it is in the human condition. So that's how we understand it above. So the external aspect of the divine, and in the divine attributes, because here we're talking about, actually we even, beyond the divine attributes, we're talking about divine pleasure and divine will. What he was able to apprehend in the divine attributes was the external aspect, not even the internal emotions. The internal emotions are loving kindness, chesed gvura tiferes. The external aspects are the, again, netzach yesod. But a lot more needed to go and elaborate upon that, but that's the brief idea. Anything else? Or maybe let's ask Michelle. And Michelle, you want to share with us? And then Vilma, if you find another question after Michelle asks her question, and please, we'll go ahead, Michelle.
Rabbi, hi.
Hello.
I'm sorry I missed the first part of the shiur today, but I was taking my son out for lunch, so please excuse me.
You don't need to be excused if you're connecting with your son and being there for him.
So you mentioned that you love someone from just the pleasure they give you, but it's loving the person for that person, for
right.
the connection you have with them.
Yes.
So that connection must be a soul connection only.
Totally. Right.
So what makes two souls connect in a way that another two souls don't connect? What do those two souls have that they find each other and create this bond together? That's my question.
Very excellent. So I would suggest that, it's what you find in yourself. You can connect only to someone else based on how you perceive yourself. So if you perceive yourself merely as a pleasure seeker, and your pleasure seeking in life is of a material nature, lollipops. So from my granddaughter 3, lollipops, and when you become 33, so then it's also pleasure, but maybe then it's from clothes, maybe then it's from fast cars, maybe then it's from fine wine, whatever, you get the picture, right? The point is, how you perceive yourself will be how you perceive others. So if you perceive yourself as an individual who is moved, motivated, and is all about, these things, so then that's the pleasure you're going to seek in someone else. That's the pleasure you'll seek in them, because that's, how you perceive yourself. If you perceive yourself, so let's give another way. You perceive yourself as a let's say, let's make it more spiritual. Let's say you perceive yourself as a observant Jew, a soulful, meaningful, deep meaning, searching, soulful, observant Jew. Well, then what's going to happen is you're going to attach yourself to people who are meaningful, soulful, observant Jews, right? for example, or of that ilk. Right? Which, by the way, that's not how I perceive myself. Um, because if that were the case, so then um, I, I would have trouble to connect in a profound connection with someone who is not that way. Because that's how I perceive myself. That's how I, live. That's how I perceive myself. That's how I live my life, and that's my sense of identity. So then that's who I will identify and connect with. But I personally just perceive myself as a Jew, period. And therefore, I don't make a boundary of, oh, you're an observant Jew, so okay, you're a very, soulful Jew, therefore I can connect. I can connect to a fellow Jew, no matter, what their level of observance, what their level of commitment. And as a result of that, that also gives the capacity to connect to someone who isn't Jewish, a non-Jew, based on the fact that what makes me a Jew is not my observance of being Jewish, but the soul that I have. So that Jewish soul then allows me to connect to a non-Jew for who they are. And as a result. So I try to look at myself that way and lead myself that way, and connect to others that way. Now, does that mean with everybody it's going to be a deep, meaningful, soulful, very profound connection? Not necessarily, because not necessarily that's how another person sees themselves. It might be very superficial, but okay. So you try to connect on to the person, as in this week's parsha, Sher Husham, or actually last week, where the person is, not where you'd like them to be, but where they're at. Now, from there, you want to uplift anybody and everybody that you can, so you connect to them and appreciate them for who they are, and if you can have an inspiration and give them something more, so you give them something more. I hope that helps you, Michelle. Does that resonate?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Luz, please. Did I pronounce your name properly?
You can just say Luz.
Okay.
Like the loose bone.
Go ahead. Please share with us.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
You answered one of the questions that I had when you used the word appreciate instead of connect. Basically, appreciate things in other people. It would be like a connection, like having a good feeling towards that person, not just how can I say it, liking people that do something for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay, so that's one. The other one was because of the times that we're in. I don't know if you already mentioned this. I mean, we're discussing the parsha, we're discussing interacting with other people in the real world.
Right.
There's a lot of friendships that are created online, and people, I don't know if it's because they need something. We all need something. We all need company. We're all kind of isolated a little bit because of the times that we live in.
Right.
We just have to be careful because I don't think this connection thing works the same online. We really have to be careful. We don't know who the other person on the other side is.
Yeah, but you're right. But you're connecting. How are you connecting? You're connecting. It's got its limitations, of course. It's got its it's more conversation. Is it a real connection? Yeah, on some level. Some level, it's a real connection because if you're giving something real to that person, and they feel that they've gained something. So we've given. We've given. So you know what? Actually, let's put it in these words. Um, the human condition is pleasure, and the pleasure is to seek to have your pleasure being fulfilled, whatever that is. Lollipop, fast cars, fine wine, um, beautiful melody, intelligent, conversation, meaningful conversation, or divine words of Torah. Or you could seek to give pleasure to another. And maybe that is the sum total of all of this. Seeking to give the pleasure to another. So for my granddaughter, it's going to be playing with her about, she's got a ice cream, this ice cream store. Thank God it's only plastic ice cream. Otherwise, boy, I've been eating a lot of ice cream. I'm playing with her. Giving her the pleasure. Giving her the pleasure. And then there is to, others, to give them the pleasure that they need. So we're here to serve, to give the pleasure, rather than seeking the pleasure. Now that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. We're not saying, it's ball and chain. It should be ball and chain. We should have pleasure to be able to do that. Should be have the pleasure in order to give pleasure. That should be our pleasure. Then, on whatever it is. So if it's on Clubhouse and, it's has its limitations, of course, you don't know who you're talking to, what it is, and da-da-da-da, okay. I think that's a very powerful idea. Thank you for bringing that up.
So we're talking about the energy flow here, the pure energy flow, and then we keep in mind the constraints and safety, security, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
About the pure energy flow, like the Creator gives pleasure, and then at a certain point, we receive. We all want to receive and receive and receive, but then at a certain point, I don't know if it's that we mature or we just become full, and then we want to give.
Right.
So that flow. And in giving, we get pleasure.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, but it's not like, okay, I'm going to give so I can have the pleasure, because then really I'm only giving for the pleasure, right? We're giving because we're here to serve, and we do it with pleasure. We do it with pleasure as opposed, I'm doing it for the pleasure, right? That would be a lot more profound.
Well, yes, you are. You have very deep meaning. I'm trying to put it in simple words for myself. It's almost, to me, it's almost like a maturing process. But,
of course.
According to what I have read, it's almost like an overflow. At some point, we don't get pleasure in receiving only. We want to give.
Right.
Like take care of somebody, help people.
Right.
Things like that, no?
Absolutely. Or teach people. Or that, whatever it is that person needs. So, my granddaughter needs that, that I play with her, that she's serving me ice cream.
So, Rabbi, would you say that connecting is about being attuned with the needs of others?
Well said. Yes.
That's very good, yeah.
Yeah, well said. All right, folks. I gotta run. Tomorrow, we continue our conversation. Amazing and beautiful. I'm Rabbi Ronnie. Sorry?
We couldn't get to all the questions. I'm sorry about that.
So tomorrow we'll continue. So whoever has questions, please do raise them again tomorrow. But, tomorrow, another day. 1 o'clock, don't forget, we have Rambam at 1 o'clock. Join us. at on Facebook, Chabad. I mean, on Chabad ZK. Hopefully it'll be on, but it's for sure on Zoom. 770-6085. Come and join us. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from my granddaughter's home. Where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful, great day. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, now I'm having a problem with how to close Facebook. So I don't see it. It doesn't give me the end button over here. Thank you, folks. I can't see the screen when I'm teaching, so I don't even know if you had questions, but we'll get to that.